Good morning and welcome to the podcast. With me as always, Sanchez. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How you doing, brother?
And Nida Wood. Nida, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. So I say we start the day with a popular celebrity type of divorce. Sam, what you got for us?
Well, obviously, there's so many in the news to choose from, but I was really intrigued by the Shakira, Gerard Pique fiasco that's going on, kind of all these different places.
Soccer and the rock star.
Soccer and the rock star, her hips don't lie. Apparently, her bank account does, so does her CPA, but, you know,
Yeah, she's a little bit trouble with the Spanish government for the tax situation. So hopefully she'll get that sorted out because I guess they got divorced, and now she's going Taylor Swift on her and taking shots in her latest song. I guess.
well, and the challenge with somebody like that, and we've experienced it, obviously handling the clients that we do is, they have residences all over the world.
Right.
They're spending time in all these different places. They're getting sued in different places, or at least she is. And so, at the inception of that case, obviously, when you've got a lot of assets, it's always interesting to me how you choose venue, right? Where are we going to get divorced?
Where
And
do you
while that is
where do you spend most of your time? I don't know.
right. And even then, like where are the kids, where's the property? Well, if it's all over the place, it can add a lot of complexity. And it's things that we've talked about, but I definitely feel like that's something that we're gonna, it'll be interesting to see how the details came out because they were one who, and a lot of celebrities try to do this. I think even, normal people, you and I, the
Would you
us
like
of a
Would you like to hear the lyric?
yeah, give it to me.
You traded a Rolex for a Casio.
Well,
How old is
okay.
and how old is
You
he?
traded a Ferrari for a Twingo, which I guess is a certain type of Renault. I'm not too familiar with French or Spanish automobiles.
They're
But
those
you
little
traded a
bitty like
Rolex for a Casio. Woo!
she's mad. Well, she's to be fair, Gerard is, he's a good looking kid. I'm sure he's going to do just fine. Um,
Yes, yes.
yeah, both of them will. But like when we're looking at divorce, I think that's something that people have to really understand is one, if you want to try to keep it quiet like they did till it's done, you really have to kind of work with your attorneys and have a plan. But the second part of that, I think that I'd love to hear you guys kind of take on is, where do you file? A lot of people, we talk to clients who live in
I mean, I
multiple
think in
states,
the.
especially now with the mobile kind of economy,
I mean,
everything's
I don't know.
digital.
I don't know if these people are worth millions and millions of dollars and they don't live like us. But I would think that this is a situation where like you don't let emotions like take get the best of you. And I know that didn't work with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, but um, you would think that you plan this thing out and you try to plan it to where you get where both of them can get the best treatment, you know, for the divorce as possible. I mean, I think you business deal this thing just like everybody else's, ridiculous as that sounds. I think you plan this thing out. I think that's why you got a team of attorneys and accountants and different people to try to get you on the, get you on the right track and let them deal with it. That's my thought anyway. I mean, when you're living with that kind of money, I mean, she goes and stays in the Bahamas. He stays in Spain or whatever, and they don't have to see each other. Have to see each other for months. It's not like they're living in the same house and the judge has to throw one of them out.
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends on also what property maybe they had before and maybe also what they accumulated during. So then in that case, what may be the best venue or jurisdictional area for one may not necessarily be the best for the other. And at the same time, while they have lots of money, they're still people. So I'm sure will use their emotions as part of the divorce game and
Right,
how
which
they're
is why
feeling.
you get the why you would get the team, right?
Yep.
Or you try to anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is obviously you have two kids, in their situation. So that's going to affect stuff. And not only that, but if you think about the tax implications that are coming out in the news now, right? It's not like they weren't married when, potentially some of this income was made. Well, obviously none of us are licensed to practice law in Spain, but if you need me to do that, I can try to work on it. But like in that situation, like how are you insulating somebody? A lot of times you can't insulate people from the tax implications of what comes out during a marriage. It's while Spain, is part of our legal foundation, whether the community property laws are applicable in the same way. I mean, in Texas, It's something that, people should always kind of contemplate and consider, whether it's Texas or Florida. At least, things that I know that they come in and they're like, you're an international person, you want to get divorced in, the United States and the state in which you're in. But, there's all kinds of implications, not just state taxes, but federal taxes. And how do you, can you shield somebody? Maybe. A lot of times you can't. It's far reaching, and the federal government doesn't care about state orders. It's kind
No,
of
they
like
don't.
whatever. Yeah.
I think you try to eviscerate them in song, though, after the divorce is over with. I think it's the way you go about it. I think
Baby,
that's how you get
don't
the
trade a Rolex for a Casio. That's all I can tell you.
right. You go ahead and eviscerate them in song later. You get it the business part worked out, and then you make the song, right, and hope it's a hit. Okay, so let's talk about our kind of topic of the day, which is the $50 billion a year family law industry, the divorce industrial complex, for lack of a better word. They've estimated that there's this documentary on Amazon that we're gonna watch and review at some point, but for right now, let's hit the high points. Basically, the $50 billion a year family law industry in the United States is what they've estimated. Family law costs and what people deal with. The movie centers around the no-fault divorce law that passed in California in 1969. There's a similar no-fault, irreconcilable insupportability difference in Texas. So there's basically that in Texas as well. Making divorce easier to file, but the downside of that is divorce is not necessarily easier to complete. So we can speak to that. I mean, divorces are simple to file, but not necessarily very easy to complete. But I think I don't know. Regardless of trying to shine a happy light on it, I mean, my firm opinion on this is divorce is never a good thing. So it's not like you're ever going to get anything that paints a rosy picture of this. I mean, the documentary or the movie outlines, their big critiques of divorce is that it's needlessly complicated, expensive, unfair, and corrupt. So I think we can probably hit on all of those topics if you want. I mean, let's start out with needlessly complicated. So easy to file, hard to complete, right? So what do you think?
So yeah, it's hard to complete because one, a lot of the procedural aspects that different courts might have with respect to what you need to file, when you need to file certain things by, forms. A lot of different courts have different ancillary forms that need to be completed upon filing a final document. Of course, the final decree needs to have certain aspects that have to be met statutorily and possibly based on the court's policies and rules. If those aren't met, then you're not getting a divorce.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it's. I mean, I don't play devil's advocate. I realize the process is complicated. I don't know that it's necessarily needlessly complicated. I mean, there's a reason why they have the things that they have. I mean, they try to streamline it as much as possible, and it's a difficult situation all the way around. I mean, it's not easy to do a lot of things, but I mean, like inventories, trying to get agreements and sworn inventories. Yeah, it takes a lot of time to complete those things, but I mean, it's better if the two parties can agree on values of things rather than fighting over value of everything. So that's where an inventory could be helpful. I mean, is it needlessly complicated is the question.
I think it is when you talk about like the new changes that have come about recently. So, mandatory disclosures, as an example, to start the discovery process, it's a requirement now when you file in Texas. From the second that you file, you're instantly on the clock. That's something that's going to have to be done and produced to the other side. Now, can they waive it? Sure. Is that an additional cost that's unnecessary? I think so. And in a lot of divorces, it's really not necessary. Now, in plenty of divorces, it becomes there's a reason that we want it as lawyers, because we're going to need it, right? We're going to need that information to try to complete any kind of document or the process for clients. But does it have to be formalized? Does it have to go? Because anytime you formalize something, as attorneys, we all know that means expensive. You talk about discovery, and that's legal assistant time, paralegal time, attorney time, and it just adds to the expense when it's something that a lot of times smart lawyers would try to work with clients and opposing counsel to try to get that done without necessarily incurring that cost. And I think we've done things of late that really lend themselves towards spending more money early.
Yeah, and the funny thing is the Supreme Court is kind of past that to try to make the process easier,
Yeah.
but and it does make it more complicated certainly, especially if you're a pro se trying to go through the process. I mean, not having a lawyer, not knowing these rules. I mean, I get where that becomes complicated, and then obviously having to hire a lawyer, it does make it expensive. Let's talk about expense. They say the average contested divorce in America, so this is countrywide, so it takes everything from Washington State to Florida to New York to Maine to L.A. The average cost of a contested divorce is about 50 grand. Um, I'd say that's probably in the ballpark. I mean,
I think it's a little low. I think it's a little low if you're talking contested. Because if it's contested, and let's say that you're going to have to go to a conclusion, meaning you go in a final trial, I mean, you could spend $50,000 just a trial.
yeah.
Um, and so to say that that's the whole process and that's what you spend and it was contested. Now, contested is one of those, terms of art. People hear contested and I think they kind of go, oh, contested just means that we didn't necessarily agree, but in the end we got to a conclusion. No, contested means you fight about stuff all the time. You go to court, and going to court, I've told you guys this before, but it's like playing polo, right? Sport of Kings, super expensive to play that game. If you're going to fight in court, just expect to pay tons and tons of money because our time, judges' time, other side's time, the ancillary things that come from a hearing or any kind of contested litigation is expensive,
So
and so you can
let's talk
multiply
about
it
the
times
court.
three or four.
Is the family court system unfriendly and untrustworthy? I wouldn't say that it's untrustworthy at all. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily unfriendly, but I mean, it is a adversarial process, and it is, the judges and the courts want to make sure you're doing you're getting everything right on these complicated things. So, I don't,
Nida,
I could see how there's the appearance of unfriendliness,
Nida,
but
but what about judges? Like, I'll tell you my experience, but your experience. Do you feel like judges are mad, are meaner, are less patient than they have been in the past?
I think they do get, I think judges get pressure to move dockets. I think that's obviously true. The courts have been backlogged because of COVID. I mean, that's also true. Are they unfriendly? I mean, I think a lot of them are trying to do a hard job. I mean, really, I mean, when you think about it, how does a judge decide a custody case between two good parents? I mean, that's the hardest thing in the world to do. There's two good parents here. They both want custody. How do I decide this? So
Yeah,
then you,
I don't think they're meaner or anything like that. I think I agree with Brian. They have a hard job to do. In my experience, I think they do the best job that they can, given the fact. I think they look at both sides. They consider the evidence. I think a lot of judges that I've seen, they do give pro se parties the benefit of the doubt, and they do try to help them to a certain extent. Of course, they can't give them legal advice because they're not their counsel, but I've seen judges direct them to the right person or location to try to get help. So I think, they're there to help the people. They're there, as a governmental entity, they try to do the best job they can, given the hard job that they do have.
now I think there's sometimes some difficulties with judges, and I think after they've been on the bench a long time, sometimes there is the tendency to get cynical and to get I don't know, get a little bit more short, I guess is a better short with the litigants when they've heard the same thing thousands and thousands of times and they hear it every week. I think that can come across as maybe mean, but I mean, if they've heard the same thing over and over and over again for years, then they are going to get a little jaded. I mean, it's human nature. It's not complex. It's not rocket science. It's human nature, and so I think you're going to have to present more, and I think you're going to have to show more, and you're going to have to show differences in your case versus somebody else if you're going to sway that judge after a while. And I think sometimes they just want people to move on because they've heard it. They've heard it all. They most of these judges were practicing attorneys before, and they've heard it all.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you guys. I do, however, believe that I think our society, courts are reflective of our society. I feel like it may take courts a little longer to, kind of catch up. But, I feel like our society right now, we're very impatient. We're very terse with one another. We are, and I think courts have adopted that. I think that they're post COVID way behind. Their dockets are smashed. And you're right, they do hear to each client, your story is unique. To a judge who hears these types of cases all the time, it's not so unique. And so I feel like all those things have led to an environment that's very uninviting for clients. I try to really dissuade clients from, necessarily wanting their day in court, not just because, I want, obviously we're litigators. That's where we were raised. That's where we spend our time. That's where we're good. But, what I try to tell people is just going to court doesn't mean you're going to get what you want. There is a cathartic side to going to court, that, you get to open your mouth and say what you want and it's on the record for God and country to know. But the other side of it is that, the repercussions of doing that are far reaching and not always friendly and not always what you thought they were going to be. So I do kind of feel like the environment has shifted from when I started practicing. Judges have always been grumpy. It's okay. I get why you're grumpy. Listen to freaking people's problems all day long. You're going to get grumpy too. And they're complicated and hard, like Nida said. But I do feel like, there's been this kind of shift of we're very dissociative, I guess would be the word, as a society. And I think that's running into the courts where there's just kind of this like, I ain't got time. And I'm not gonna say I don't care because I do care. I'm a judge. I'm getting paid to care. But to Bryan's point, you're gonna have to really spend a lot of time and energy to get me to a point that makes me want to do something unique.
Right, and I don't think they're, I look at it from the standpoint of you really have to have something. And I'm not saying that you don't, like you said, I'm not saying you don't go to court and have your day and tell everybody, your everything that you feel is wrong. But sometimes the judge isn't going to agree with you. I mean, isn't going to think it's as bad as you think it is. Because if you think about the frame of reference for a person that's a judge, I mean, they're hearing CPS cases where there's abuse, where there's legitimate abuse, and you're mad about, dad brings the kid 15 minutes late to soccer practice every week. I mean, the judge is not going to care as much about that when they're, the next case in front of them is a domestic abuse case or something. So, I think that can seem like it's unfriendly, certainly. And I think they're trying to be efficient. I think efficiency sometimes lose the message with trying to be more efficient. And I think that does happen. I think that certainly happens.
I think
Okay.
part of the unfair that people might think also is that sometimes the law is not fair. So you have to consider what the law is based on what you're wanting, and is what you're wanting going to be in line with what the law says? And in that sense, if it's not, then you go to court or not, you can maybe agree to something that might not be what the law is, but if you're going to court, you're probably not getting something that you consider fair if it's not the
Right,
law.
especially if you think that you're entitled to more than what the law would prescribe. I mean, you're going to automatically think the system is corrupt just because you're never going to be able to get what you think you're entitled to because the law is not set up that way. I mean, that conversation we have all the time. The law is
Right.
just not set up to get you 100% of this. It's just not.
Right. I mean, well, a perfect example of that, I mean, to y'all's point is, let's say a standard possession schedule in Texas, right? There's this huge trend to do 50-50 possession schedules between parents who have kids in a divorce process, same amount of time. Well, to one parent, that sounds like super fair. To another parent, there's like absolutely not. The law as it stands right now is that no, a judge's obligation is to weigh two parents and choose somebody based on history or the current situation that's better and give them more time. And that has financial implications. And so, but people always want to say, like, hey, you know what, I know I can convince a judge, let me into court, and my story is compelling. And it's so hard to tell people, like, it's compelling to me because obviously I know you, I've spent time with you, I understand, but it may not be compelling to a judge. And a judge has this foundation in Texas, and really Florida's a little different, but in Texas, they have the law to lean back on that says no. I mean, I don't have to pay attention to that. It's presumptively fair that I give you, one person more time and one person less time. That's the law. And when you tell a client that, a lot of times they don't understand it. So they get the impression when they go to court and they have that kind of a result that it's absolutely unfriendly. Like, hey, he didn't even listen to me. When he did, he's just like, hey, you're a perfectly good parent. That's why I'm giving you what the
Right.
law says I can give you. Yeah, to Nida's
So
point. So
they're
you really
talking
got to
about
understand that.
one of the critiques is that there's wildly inconsistent judicial standards, that basically the best interest of the child standard is wildly inconsistent. I would agree with that. Yeah, it is. I mean, it varies from court to court and judge to judge. What they think is in the best interest of a particular child in a particular case may vary from court to court and person to person. And yeah, that's the dice roll you get when you go to court like that.
Yeah, well, we
Well
elect
said.
judges in Texas too, right? So you
Oh,
add
that's
that as the mad scramble.
that's another thing, that all the lawyers are in it with the judges, and the judges are trying to become mediators after they're judges. So they make their rulings based on campaign contributions and what their hustles that they can get after being judges. I think that's pretty unfair to judges, honestly, or trying to do a hard job. I mean, personally, I think I think judges look at attorneys they know and who appear in front of them a lot, and I think they rely on the officers of the court who appear in front of them a lot. And the way, I mean, yes, Texas has campaign contributions for judges and stuff like that, but the only people that give campaign contributions to judges are normally people that they know and people that appear in front of them. So, you don't, I mean, most people don't know who all their district judges are, or who all their, probate court judges are, or all their county court judges are. So, who, how do they finance their campaigns? By getting money from people that they know who appear in front of them a lot. So, does it make the system unfair? I don't know. I mean, if you think the judge is completely corrupt, there's mechanisms for that. And there's always another election 4 years down the road. And but like I
Once
said,
your case is done.
I think a judge, trusting an attorney or trusting the argument that the attorney is making is sometimes confused for corruption, and I don't think that's necessarily fair for the attorney or the judge.
Yeah, well, that's another reason to know your judge and know which court you're in, because they're people too. They have preferences based on your history in front of that court. You kind of know which way they tend to rule on some issues. And of course, that's an issue with new judges because we don't really have that history and don't know how they're going to be. But that takes time. So
And how many times have you guys been in court when your client comes out after and said, "I had all this stuff and the judge wouldn't even listen to me, and I had all this stuff. I proved all this stuff in court. I showed all this stuff, and the judge didn't listen to me." Well, yeah, you did show all that stuff. Yeah, you did tell all that stuff, but maybe where the law was, that didn't really matter. Because the lawyers and the judges know exactly kind of where the law looks at these things, and maybe that just didn't matter. I proved all this stuff. I proved all this fraud, but maybe it was a no fault divorce, and there was no fault grounds pled. And so, yeah, maybe you brought in all that evidence, but it doesn't necessarily change the ruling because it wasn't pled right, or there's any number of reasons.
Yeah, so state bars, local bars, and I don't mean the place where you go have your drink at. I mean like where attorneys are participating and belong to. I do think that relationships matter. I do think that while I don't necessarily want to say that you know, it's not a bad thing. To have a collegial bar is a good thing. Where attorneys know judges, where judges know attorneys, where your reputation for honesty and integrity and skill precedes you in a courtroom is a benefit to a client. And I don't know that that necessarily makes it where, there's this big incestuous, or nefarious setup that lawyers and judges are taking advantage of. However, I will tell you that it can absolutely work to a client's detriment if they don't realize that. If they select somebody who, doesn't know a judge and his predisposition or her predispositions, because judges, I tell people judges have the patience typically of gnats, right? A gnat's attention span is very short, and a judge is kind of the same way because they have finite amounts of time to spend on any particular issue in any given day. And so if you don't know your audience or really have the respect or at least a little bit of, you know, confidence that the judge will listen to you, you can step in a landmine without even knowing it.
Sure.
And a client can do that if they're not guided appropriately by their attorney. And so that can make it seem like, hey, you know what, this other attorney, everything that they said, the judge was like, yeah, 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 everything that you said, freaking the judge was all over you. You couldn't get anything in. Well, sometimes it's knowing your audience. Sometimes it's just like Bryan said, the facts of it, the judge is like, I don't find that relevant at all. But it's hard to distinguish those two things, right? It's hard to
Or
listen to that or have that experience and not feel like the fix is in.
or if you had, there was used to be a judge, I think down here, that was a like a drug court criminal judge before being a family judge, and so her hackles were up when it came to drug cases. Like drugs were a huge issue for her, whereas another judge, little weed didn't care that much, So it's kind of like you said, it's kind of knowing your audience. So, you know, the slightest hint of drugs in this lady's court, and everybody's getting drug tested. And
Mhm.
this other judge said, "Well, I don't really care about weed. That doesn't bother me." And so, and these were in the same courthouse and then down the hall from one another. So, the other stuff. I mean, the judge is not to say that the second judge who didn't care about the weed didn't care about kids or didn't care about safety or anything like that. It's just, you know, his particular viewpoint wasn't as strict as the judge who ran the drug court for a number of years. It's just it was a different feeling. Um,
Well, and
and
Bryan, just last point on that, guys. So, like lawyers, right? I think clients get upset when they see lawyers talking to each other like, "Hey, we know each other." Well, guess what? This is our job, and we probably do know each other. And even if we don't, like, it's important as it's part of our code of ethics that we're supposed to treat each other professionally. I mean, this is something that we're going to be practicing in this courtroom with these attorneys long after your case is done, so that we don't get in somebody's face and act a fool or are rude, or it doesn't mean that we're in cahoots with them to try to sabotage your case.
and the same thing,
And
if the judge is friendly to a lawyer, doesn't mean
right.
that they're gonna just automatically side with them. I've had judges rule against me that shook my hand before they walked out on the bench.
Oh yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
for sure.
So just because, like you said, just I mean the professional ethics require that attorneys are collegial with one another and judges are collegial with the attorneys. That's the way it's supposed to work. It does help people move through a difficult time and a difficult system much more quickly, I feel like. Because if you
Yeah.
notice how when you're at odds with your opposing counsel, and I know I've noticed this, when everything becomes a chore, it's a slog. At that point, you're arguing about everything. You're objecting. They're objecting. The case takes 3 times as long. Inevitably, it probably has the same outcome as if you got along. But you know, um, sometimes you don't get along. So that's how it
True.
is.
Well, the
Um,
cost goes up if you're arguing about everything. And
sure.
sometimes you don't get results also all the time. Sometimes it's not being aggressive, so you do get along to see if you can reach an that benefits the clients. And there's a time and place, I think, to be aggressive and maybe not be aggressive.
And
That
the
balance.
the so what do you think about the current court, divorce industrial complex creates false domestic violence claims, high support and high alimony. Um,
Divorce industrial complex. I like that. That's good.
do you think that it creates more false domestic violence claims or higher child support or higher alimony? Well, in Texas, I mean, child support is basically capped, so I don't know that necessarily becomes an issue. Um, does it create more domestic violence claims? Probably. I mean, in a contested case, you're going to use everything that you think is important, um, and make a mountain out of every molehill. So, and and then there are legitimate cases of abuse, and you know there are fake cases of abuse, I guess, but there are some legitimate ones as well. I mean, that sometimes comes along with any kind of emotional situation. I mean, there is you know we'd be stupid to say there isn't domestic violence, but are they all fake claims? No, of course not. Are they all false claims? No. Are there more false claims because of the process? I don't know. I don't know that you can necessarily say that. I guess the
What do
question
you
is,
think,
do you
Nida?
think there's more false domestic violence claims because of the way that the divorce process is?
I don't think it's because of the way the divorce process is. I think it's because they're going through a divorce in general, that they're going to use whatever they can to possibly their advantage. And if that means trying your luck to see if the domestic violence sticks in court and possibly getting alimony when you may not otherwise meet the burden, then why not give it a shot and maybe that client's mind or that, that person's mind.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true.
I think as attorneys, you have to advise your client, though, whether it's really a domestic violence case that you should pursue or not, because you don't want to be that attorney that's pursuing a frivolous domestic violence case in court and then have a bad reputation
What
with that
about
judge.
what about verbal abuse?
Emotional abuse. I honestly, I feel it. I feel the other way. I feel that the way that the law is currently written, there's such a huge advantage to victims of that. And, obviously I'm very sympathetic to anyone who's had to endure that type of situation. And I understand the law and the purpose behind it. And I think it's valid and it's honorable. But I do think that it lends itself to abuse because people who look at that and say, over a glass of wine with their friends, hey, if if I can, assert a domestic violence claim, and those are a lot of he said, she said, very difficult to prove, right? Very difficult to gather evidence. Now, when there's evidence and it's clear, and the law I feel should apply. But even in those situations, it's very difficult a lot of times to discern like who's the victim, who's the instigator, what was it done for, what was the purpose. But the effect of it is a slam dunk. It smashes somebody else's case. It ends a conservatorship conversation because it instantly, if somebody is found that that's the case, then the judge awards all the rights to the other parent. It doesn't necessarily affect time, but it can. It has implications financially, right? Because judges, when they hear those kinds of things, I feel like if they feel that they're meritorious, they absolutely will apply that to further the case, future hearings, decisions against or for your client. The ramifications are really large. And in part, it's because the way we've crafted the law in Texas specifically, which gives you so much of an advantage when that happens. And the purpose is to protect victims, right? It's supposed to be kind of, in my opinion, this deterrent that says, hey guys, don't do this because if you do, here's the crap that's going to happen to you. But we don't deal with the in front of actions. We're really reactive, right? What has already happened and how do we apply it? And so I feel like there are people who, not a lot, but I think there are people who take advantage of that, understanding that if they can, throw spaghetti against the wall, to Nida's point, right? And it works, then they've just really won a case in its entirety. And that can happen very early on in a case, very
Sure,
early on.
sure. Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to discern what the legitimate cases are from the fake cases. Sometimes, I mean, it really is. What are the cases? And like you said, they're very fact specific, and they lend themselves to a lot of he said, she said, a lot of mutual combat type of situations. You know, those create a lot of difficulty. But yeah, you're absolutely right. If you're able to make that case, then yeah, you are automatically slam dunk. The other side's probably getting supervised visits, batterers intervention courses, all kinds of counseling and different things, possibly a protective order. It's absolutely a slam dunk if you can make the case. But at the same time, I get why the law is in place because you can't have an organized society when there's when there's horrible abusive things going on in homes. So you gotta make sure that it's tough. I mean that's a tough situation. I guess the question is, do I think that there are more false domestic violence claims as a result of the way the system's set up? I mean, I guess it's possible. I mean, there's no way to know. There's no way to ever know for sure whether that's true or not. I mean, I guess yes. I mean, if somebody is conniving enough, and there are a lot of sociopaths out there, or narcissists, or different people that can definitely make try to make this kind of stuff work for them. So yeah, I mean, could there be more? Yes. I mean, it's certainly possible. Do I know? Is there any way to verify that for sure? No. unless you go into everybody's home that's ever had a divorce case and see whether that's true or not. I mean, I think with respect to men and women, I think, and I don't want to sound sexist here, but the fact of the matter is, I mean, men are less likely to report it. So I don't think there's as many false claims when it comes to men reporting, because men are less likely to report domestic violence, and that's a true statistic.
Yeah, I
So
do think, law enforcement is working better on that aspect. At least I've seen in cases, it seems like they're more apt to kind of, like, even in a mutual combat situation, they're just kind of like, somebody's leaving and probably both of you guys are getting citations, which makes it even more complicated, right? But, I think of like the Dana White incident that just happened recently, right? So, they're at a party, his wife comes up, whatever he pops off and says, she all, rears back, smacks him in the face. He takes a second, smacks her back. So, she came out and said, no, I've been a victim of, domestic violence. This is how he's treated me, for years. That divorce. I mean, the guy's worth billions of dollars now from selling the UFC. So, you know, is that it's obviously video evidence. I mean, do we know what led up to it? Do we know what happened behind closed doors? Are her, allegations or assertions going to be proven true? Who knows? That's going to be an interesting to watch as well. But in this situation, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's very clear from the video evidence, she comes up and just freaking hauls off and wails on him. And that he responds, well, should he have? No, ever. Freaking just like walk away, be a man. That's my opinion. And it's probably pretty sexist, but I'm just saying, like, he shouldn't have, he did it anyways. And so, like, but if it happened that way, is it likely that it happened in the past? Well, as a judge, like, that's such a complicated thing to have to listen to, between testimony. And a lot of times there just isn't. There's not photographs, there's not videos, there's not eyewitnesses. This is in the privacy of people's homes and nobody's around. So, but there is a huge advantage, whether he's in California or whether he's in Texas or whether you're in freaking Florida, like, there is an advantage to the property distribution, because all of those places, while well, maybe not in California, but I would tell you, like in Texas specifically, right, we're no fault, but there is still fault. There
right,
is
you
still the
can get fault
avenue to
grounds,
use that. Yeah, absolutely.
and yeah, domestic violence would be in the realm of getting a disproportionate division of assets, history or pattern of violence. Yeah, that could be. It becomes serious and significant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, alimony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you qualify for alimony and all kinds of different things. So, are alimony payments demonstrably high? I mean, honestly, this is where I think the legislature has done a pretty good job in Texas of kind of scaling that back. Is it always fair? No, but it's also in line with, I think, it doesn't keep people from asking for $200,000 a month in alimony if they're married to a billionaire. But um, with the way that the property division shakes out and the way alimony is set up in Texas, I feel overall, I think it's reasonable. Is it fair in every case? Of course not. You can't be fair in every case. But is it reasonable under the circumstances to have the alimony system set up? Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think it is. I mean, if you can support yourself, you're entitled to no alimony. Do I think that's pretty rigid? But Texas is not a fan of alimony. Um, so if you make minimum wage, I guess the federal government says we can support ourselves on minimum wage, right? Supposedly,
Mm-hmm.
and your husband's a doctor, are you entitled to alimony? Technically, legally, probably no. Um, is that fair? No, that's probably not fair in that particular situation. But um, if you're you know, make 50, 60, $70,000 a year and you can support yourself, um, and your husband makes $150,000 a year, is alimony necessary in those types of situations? No, I don't think I don't think it probably is. But because child support and property division can cover where those deficiencies are. Because the courts oftentimes will divide property to the spouse who makes less money in their favor. It may not be by a huge margin, but a little bit.
Yeah, again, know your audience, because courts vary on that a lot. I had one
Mm-hmm.
court, I think the case was pending for a year. Evidence was presented at the trial for 2 job applications that she submitted, and she got a little bit of post-divorce maintenance. Um, not real, like I would say, not big reasonable efforts to try to get employment. But then most of my other cases, you know, there may be a disparity in income and they may have tried to get a better job or more education, but no post-divorce maintenance in those cases. So very dependent on the judge, I would say also. So I would say the majority of them lean, like you said, Bryan, towards no post-divorce maintenance and maybe higher property division in the lower income earning spouse.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think that you know, I think that if you thought what I try to tell clients is divorce is not fair. The only time that there's fair is in October down at Fair Park, right? And that's you go buy your freaking
Big
corny
Ferris
dog,
wheel, big
yeah,
Ferris
your
wheel.
funnel cake, and you can talk to big techs. That's the only fair that's going to happen in the state of Texas in relation to divorce. It's not fair. It's not designed to be fair. It's not written. The laws are not written for it to be fair. It's just a matter of what can happen in your case. And so, you know, when you talk to people, they look at it and they say, well, look, our life together was X, right? We had a certain lifestyle. We lived that way, whether you're the husband or the wife, or the provider or the person who made less money but supported the family, whatever your role is, it's not going to be the same. It's never going to be the same. Your money's not going to be the same. The situation's not going to be the same. And judges know that, and the law anticipates that. And so the way the law in Texas is written is not as friendly as other states. Other states really want to look at it and say, we're going to try to keep equity between somewhat more along the lines of how you were living before, right? California is one of those states, right? You can have this perpetual alimony if you never get married again because one's a huge wage earner and the other one isn't, right? So they're going to try to keep that lifestyle from changing too much, especially if kids are involved. And Texas, to your point, Bryan, they do have like some mechanisms. We do have child support. We do have, spousal maintenance that tries to do that, not quite to the level of other states. But I think Texas very clearly looks at it and says, hey, you know what? A level of independence is important. And there is not like this indentured servitude that's going to come from the divorce process.
Which brings me up to the last point, and so it's very controversial. There's a lot of talk and articles and stuff being thrown around nowadays about men not wanting to ever get remarried again because of the unfairness of what they view as the divorce process. And like to your point, the potential for lifetime alimony and things like that. Is that do you think that well, number one, I mean we see a lot of people. So number one, do we think that's true? That you think that men are less likely to get married again because they view the system as set up against them? And two, is there any way to correct that? My personal opinion is I do think that yeah, I mean I think men are down here and women are here in a divorce case. I mean I do think I've done this for a long time. I think there's reasons for that. I think oftentimes women are the primary caregivers to children and they're not working as much. So, the financial aspect does go in favor of a wife in that type of a situation. In equal wage earner type of situations, I don't think it's as unfair. But I think men are in a more difficult position just because of society when it comes to divorce case and dividing assets. I don't think and most of the time the men are the higher wage earners. I mean, especially if there's children involved. But that's not necessarily always the case, obviously. But if you take a cross section of 100 cases, I bet you it's in the majority of them. Do I think that influences men not to get married again? Yeah, I think there's a trend in society now where men are kind of opting out because why would I put up with this? I mean, why am I going to do this again and lose half my shit or whatever? But I mean, I've heard that 1,000 times. But and that's been in fairly recent years. It's not always been the case. I mean, have you ever seen the guy that's been divorced like 4 or 5 times? I mean, they got nothing left usually. They got nothing left. I mean, by the time they get to that fifth divorce, even if they were reasonably wealthy at the beginning of the first one, you know, they typically are like spent emotionally, physically, financially, everything by the end of the fourth or fifth one. Now, that's probably some poor life choices in there if you're married 5 times, but at the same time. Um, I can
Hopeless
see
romantics. Hopeless
I
romantics.
can see where people would opt out. I mean, of a situation that they view as unfair. Um, I don't know. Your thoughts?
So I think it just depends on the facts of each case. Each case is different, but I agree with you. Like, I guess when it comes to kids, like most men that have kids as part of their marriage, they want 50-50. And a lot of them might be involved, but then you have to look at it case by case basis on who's involved more. And then in that case, sometimes you do have a little bit of an uphill battle representing men on those types of cases. Financially, I guess it just depends on what each person, tends to do for a living and what they have as far as assets and stuff go on the financial aspect. Whether or not they want to opt out of getting married in the future, who knows? But you can protect yourself with a prenup if that's a concern of yours, and try to minimize some damage if you do tend to want to get
But
married
what?
again in the
But what are the men getting out of the second go round? I mean, the second or third go round. I mean, at that.
partner, like someone to share the rest of your life with, I guess. The emotional aspect.
Yeah, I absolutely feel like your points are very salient. I think that it's true. I do feel like men are opting out, but I don't think it's just men. Honestly, I feel like there's a very consistent trend that I'm seeing, both men and women who post divorce are wanting to opt out. And if not, I'm really advising them to really seriously consider, obviously, prenuptial, postnuptial agreements, um, before they re-enter kind of that arena. And for that exact purpose, I do think that everybody is gun shy, and resources I feel like are more and more finite along couples. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It just really has such a traumatic toll on you financially and personally to go through this process that I feel a lot of people are really looking at that and saying, well, why don't we just live together? Why don't we build a life together? Why don't we be Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell for
Or
30 years? And we can love each other, we can spend time together, but our states will be separate. And if we ever want to get married, maybe someday, but let's not.
that circles us back around to the original point of this thing, which is divorce is not a good thing. So, divorce is never a good thing. It's never going to be. So, yeah, there's a lot of negative that comes along with it, and a lot of negative negative that's seen from the process. I don't, you know, my opinion is that that people talk about collusion, complicated, expensive, unfair, because the whole thing is unfair. The whole the whole your marriage is breaking up. You're gonna lose half your shit. I mean, both sides. It's unfair. You're not gonna see your kids as much as you normally would. It's unfair. It's not a good thing. So, you know, I doubt there'll ever be a documentary or anything like that where people are talking about divorce being a good thing. I just don't see that ever coming. If
Yeah,
you
yeah.
if you can find that for me, or if you can make that documentary, I'll sell you my unicorn. So
We'll work on it.
we'll use my unicorn sales to finance the movie, right? Well,
Love
thanks
it.
for the time today. I really appreciate it. And we got a lot of exciting shows coming up in the future. So, um, how do they get in contact with us, Sam and Nida, if they want to talk to you or me or you, Sam?
So if you're up in North Texas or in Florida, then you can obviously look us up on our website, aswlawoffice.com. You can reach me directly on that site, my email address, or you can reach out to me by telephone at 817-914-5470.
And Nida?
Wise. So yes, our bios are on the website, and then my personal email is on there as well. My direct line, 832-458-1502. As well as my direct cell phone is on there as well.
And so we're completely searchable. We also have, so if you're in Florida, if you're in out of state or in a different county, we have an 800 line. It's 1-888-981-7509. So if you call us, you can reach any one of the three of us, Abercrombie, Sanchez, and Wood. We're happy to help out. Happy to talk to you about any of these issues. I don't think we're going to be in any documentaries anytime soon, but, but we can certainly talk to you about your case. So thank you guys. Have a great weekend, and we will talk soon.
Thank you.